All right. So today we're going to be going over our 3-step solution to any pain. Okay? I'm David Blessing. I'm co-owner of TNT Health and Fitness. And today I want to show you guys a new way to look at chronic pain and fitness. Most people don't think that those two go together, but in reality there's a lot of correlation that we found in our research. So fitness done incorrectly can cause a lot of chronic pain, and when fitness is done correctly, it can cure actually chronic pain. So that's been the biggest thing we found out of our findings is there actually is solutions to chronic pain, and that's what we're here to help kind of show you guys of how the steps to fixing that chronic pain. So we're going to go through first our story of kind of how we came to this point, and then we're going to go through each step individually and explain each one in detail. Okay? That sound like a plan, guys? All right, so I'm going to start off with a quote here, all right? So the quote here we got is, "I have not failed, I just found 10,000 ways that didn't work." That was Thomas Edison's quote about inventing the light bulb, and that's exactly what we went through. We've trialed and error, we tested every possibility we can think of, and that's pretty much exactly what we did. I mean, we've found everything that didn't work, but we've actually found lots of really good things that have worked that we would have never even correlated. So our goal the whole time, why we were trying to find better solutions, is because we want to make everything as efficient and effective as possible. That's been our goal from day one, is getting started. Well, how can we do this a little bit better and a little bit faster to get those people to those results? So that's kind of been our driving force that led us to where we are today. And what really got us is it all started with this number, technically. 20,384 hours. So from the day we opened up our studio, me and Tyler have been pretty much working at the minimum about 8 hours a day. Some days more. It's probably about average, we'll say 8 hours a day. Some days 16 hours, some days a little bit less, but we've literally been putting in about 8 hours a day for the past 7 years. So it comes out to 20,384 hours. So that might seem like a lot of hours to you guys, and it is, but that's why we've been able to find the things we've had, because we put the work in. But the thing is, we loved every second of it. We've come up with finding tons of different things that we never would have come across without putting the time in. Some of you guys might not think of reading an anatomy book is fun, but me and Tyler do. We like to watch videos about how the human body works, but that's things that we enjoy. And every book and every little video we watched got us one step closer to helping people figure out these solutions to the problems they've been having. And really, that's where our passion comes from. That's what we want to do, is help people finally get out of the pain they've been suffering and praying to get out of for their whole life. And that's what really drives us every day to actually put in this time, because not the normal person would put 20,000 hours. So technically, that'd be 20,000 hours for both of us. So it's technically 40,000 hours if you want to look at it like that way. So we put a lot of time and a lot of energy in figuring this out. So the biggest thing, I think, my best satisfying moments is when someone hops on this table and they've been in so much pain, and they hop off that table and they're not in pain anymore. It's one of the coolest feelings, and that's what drives us to keep on trying to find cooler and easier ways to make these things happen. So it's been a cool experience, and that's what I'm here to help you guys understand of what we did. But it comes back to that first day of us opening up that studio. So this actually takes us back to where it all started. So as you can see here, so this first day, this is Tyler straight out of high school from his lifting days. I don't know if you can see it as well there. Tyler was ripped when he was coming right out of high school. He was jacked, but he also, he was lifting heavy, doing all this, but his back killed him, and his shoulder killed him. He was always in pain, but he thought, oh, it was just old sports injuries, but it was his lifting style that was doing it to him, and he didn't even know it at the time. And me, I was just straight out of college, got my exercise science degree. Both of us Tyler thinking, man, I'm jacked, I know what I'm doing, look at me. I know who wouldn't want to train with me? Me coming out of school like, hey, I just got an exercise science degree, we know everything. But guess what? We were totally wrong. We knew nothing is what we come to find out. So we get into the studio, we start training clients, we start rocking and rolling, we're getting some good results out of some people, but there was always some people that we could never lock down the actual what was going on. So it was always little pains that would keep creeping up, and we could never find solutions to it. And always in the back of our mind, they would either quit working out because they were in too much pain, or it just the things that we would do would cause more pain. So like the more exercise they did, the more pain they were in. We were like, there's no way this can be correct. What is going on? We're taking all our knowledge that we've learned from the past, schooling and all we've done in the past, and we were taking everything we did and we were going straight at that with what we had, our knowledge at that time, and it was never getting us truly the result that we wanted. So we got to that point where we have paying clients that are counting on us to fix these problems, and we didn't have answers. So we had to start putting in this time. So that's where all this started. It's been a long journey of finding out what actually is causing these problems and pain. And it really wasn't until the past probably 6 months where we really locked in all the levels that we can literally have someone hop on this table and literally they'd be out of pain within minutes, if not weeks, days, whatever that time frame needed for depending on how bad the issue was. But that's what we're here to do today, is talk about our findings. So it's the 3 steps to alleviating any pain. The first step is we need to release trigger points. We're going to talk about this here in depth here each stage. The second step is elongating the muscle, making sure we're stretching and having correct mobility in that muscle. And the third step is muscle balance. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump straight into that very first one, trigger points. Let's jump into that. So first we got a visual. Mr. Conman, come on down, hop up on the table. So hop on down. We're going to try to test a couple of different muscle positions here and see if we can find a trigger point. All right. So we're going to come out the side of this hip. And out here, you can see, not too bad, right? We're going to change that real quick. We're going to come up to here. We know that Connor has trigger points right here in his quads. So as you can see, it's a little more tender whenever we hit a trigger point. So now we're going to talk about why that actually was tender. As some of you might have experienced that yourselves. So that leads us to why does this hurt so bad? So that's what we're going to talk about today, is what's going on. What is an actual trigger point? So a trigger point is a continually contracted knot in the muscle fiber that stops blood flow, starving the muscle tissue of oxygen and nutrients. When this happens, metabolic waste toxins build up in an area, causing pain, tension, and spasms in the muscle. I know that's a lot. We're going to break every little bit of that down right now, okay? So main thing I want you to start looking at is, see these little knots right there in that muscle there. That's what the trigger point is, that little red spot. So what that is, it's a buildup of metabolic waste that's trapped inside that muscle, okay? So what I'm going to explain now is what is metabolic waste and why is it trapped there, okay? So anytime a muscle contracts, so actually for any muscle to contract, there has to be energy for it to happen, okay? Muscles don't naturally contract. There has to be energy there. So anytime how the muscle gets that contraction and energy is there's a chemical reaction that happens, okay? So every time that muscles contract, a chemical reaction happens, and there's a little waste product that is left over, okay? So that's the metabolic waste. So every time a chemical reaction happens, there's a little metabolic waste, all right? And then that can start building up in those muscles right there. So as that builds up, there's a couple ways that it can be flushed away. It can be it's naturally supposed to be flushed away. That's what's supposed to be happening. But if the rate of contraction's happening too fast, the buildup happens too fast, so the body cannot get rid of that as fast enough. Or you don't have a strong enough cardiovascular system, because the blood flow is what's going to help flush that out. So a stronger cardiovascular system can help flush that better. Or if you're dehydrated and you don't have enough water, that's what's going to flush those toxins out too, that metabolic waste out too. So what we're going to talk about here is how can you be building up so much contractions, that rate of contraction happening so fast. So Mr. Caleb's going to come over and he's going to show us a couple ways that some overuse can happen. So the first one is overuse. So one that we see a lot is cardio. So cardiovascular exercise you're going to be doing for running, just like this. You're doing hip flexion over and over and over again. So there has to be a muscle contracting every single time, so there's a chemical reaction that's happening that. So if we're doing cardiovascular exercise and it's a version where you're doing the same movement over and over and over again, that's going to cause some buildup in metabolic waste. Another one is muscle tensing. So I know a lot of people can be stressed. So when we're stressing, a lot of times we see lots of tenseness in the traps. So if you have continually tracted traps all day, that's going to cause a lot of metabolic waste building up in those traps. And that's a place we see a ton of people have a lot of trigger points at. Another one is sustained loading. So someone that has a heavy purse or heavy bag, same thing. That trap's got to do a lot of work to hold up that bag. So it's getting a lot of overuse in that trap right there too. Another one was bad posture. This is probably one of the bigger ones. So if we were up in a nice stable position, but what happens when we have bad posture? We get lots of contracting in the chest muscles and lots of contracting in the hip flexors. So we get a lot of buildup of metabolic waste in those positions like that too. So thank you, Mr. Caleb, for that one. So to help that, does that make sense of where we can get metabolic waste coming from? All right. In a direct injury, because it's going to cause scar tissue and stuff like that. But that's another way, but didn't want to kick Caleb in the knee or anything like that to cause any injuries. But, okay. So next, how does trigger points affect muscles? So Tyler's going to come up, and he's going to show us how those little knots are going to affect how a muscle is being stretched. So, before you get going, so you can see we got two different, these resistance bands are simulating muscles. We got one with no trigger points. We got one with trigger points here, okay? So these knots are representing the trigger points that the muscles are, that are happening in the muscles, okay? So when we do this, so we got an even set, okay? So when we let these down, we're going to see that one goes further than the other one will go. So as you can see, this one is stretching a lot more easy with the same amount of resistance, when this one with locked knots is harder to elongate. So that's how those, as you can see easily, that a trigger point is not going to allow you to stretch effectively. So we have to get rid of those trigger points before we can actually get to the elongating of the muscle, okay? So, you're good, Tyler? You're good? All right. So, why is that lactic acid not being flushed away? That's the next thing I want to talk about, okay? So, yes, we're getting overloading that metabolic waste there, but what happens is when that waste sits there and it's not being flushed out, it actually starts starving the muscle of oxygen. So that muscle tissue does not get oxygen, and when that happens, it sends fibroblasts to that area. And what that does, it actually causes scar tissue. So it builds a scar tissue around that metabolic waste and makes a little bubble around it. So that's what ends up happening on that. So when we have that bubble around the scar tissue, so that leads us to how are we going to get rid of those? So one, ideally, if we never allow that bubble to happen, and we're drinking lots of water, we're able to filter that out. Two is we have a strong cardiovascular system, so that whole kind of way work together. You have to have a lot of water, and you got to have a good cardiovascular system to be flushing that out. But what happens whenever that bubble gets formed around there and we can't get rid of that? The cardiovascular system in the water ain't going to do anything through it. So that's where pressure comes. So we need to apply pressure to that to bust that trigger point open to allow that toxins to now be flushed away. So Mr. Connor's going to come over and he's going to demonstrate what it's going to look like to bust a trigger point. So it's a lot like a pimple, actually, okay? So whenever you have a pimple, there's toxins in there, and you got to get that out. So you have to apply pressure to get that toxins out, okay? So this balloon, the balloon itself is representing the scar tissue that's built up around it, and the water is representing the actual toxins. So now when we apply a little pressure, oh, come on, boom, we allow the toxins to release, and now they can be flushed out again. So that's what we're doing whenever we're using our massager. We're working on when there's trigger points there, we got to bust those toxins up to allow that stuff to be, that metabolic waste to be flushed out. Okay? That makes sense so far? Everything going okay? Does anyone have questions around these trigger points and how that metabolic waste is being formed? Sharon has a question. So, okay.
I think I have trigger points. Well, I know I do. My calves and my ankles.
Yep. There's a good.
You mean you talked about the traps? how am I getting it in the calves and the ankles?
So you're walking all day. You're continually contracting those muscles over and over and over all day as you're walking. So that's probably the easiest one. That's one we see the most trigger points in, is their calves actually, because we never not use those because we're always walking, we're always moving. So those get continually contracted all the time.
So just use the massager?
Yep. Joe, we gotta dig in there with the massager and stretching, all that combination of it. Yep.
So when you're at home and you don't have the massager, how do you get rid of those trigger points?
You just have to apply pressure. You can use there's lots of different ways. You can use actually just your fingers, massage balls. So you can apply pressure with massage balls. The massager is just way more effective because it's a lot of pressure at one time. So that's why we like to use the massager, because it's way faster to make it happen.
Will stretching alone do it?
So not necessarily. It can in some situations, but when it's too bad, foam roller can be effective too. But when it's too bad, the knots aren't going to get bust open with just stretching. So that's where a lot of times you have to use the massager to bust up those trigger points. Then you can elongate the muscle. That's sort of a next step that we're going to talk about, is why that's important. But yes, we cannot. That's why that demonstration is you're never going to be able to stretch effectively without because the trigger points are going to be in that knot the whole time. Okay?
Thanks.
Yep. Any other questions? Everybody good? All right. Moving on to the next. We have muscle elongation. So it's mainly stretching, but it's the ability for your muscle to stretch to its full potential. Okay? So if you have any joints that aren't functioning correctly, you're going to have those muscles that aren't actually able to elongate. So it's either because they've just gotten tight and they need to be stretched, or there could be trigger points there. But the first thing we really need to understand is how the muscular system and the skeletal system work together. Okay? So bones don't do anything by themselves, and muscles can't function and contract without bones. Bones need muscles to move, and muscles need the structural components of the bones to be able to contract, okay? So when we look at that, we need to have, the bones are going to form joints, and then the muscles need an insertion and an origin to attach to so they can contract to move the bones and joints. Does that make sense? Am I explaining that well? So we are going to give you a little bit of example. So we're going to use a slingshot here to show you how the anatomy of a joint works. So we're going to have these guys. So they're going to be representing, their arms are going to be in the air. Their arms are the bones, okay? So they are the actual stabilization points that we need for muscles to contract. The resistance band is a muscle. So whenever we get a contraction, we need two stable spots. So let your arms move, guys. Let them just move. So come back. So you see, if we don't have a stable point, we can't get a full contraction. So when we have a stable position, we can get a contraction and fire. So that's how a muscle would work. You need a actual two stable points to be able to contract to move the bones. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So when we're moving through that, so next thing is what we want to talk about is a joint dysfunction. Okay. So I'm going to show you what a joint dysfunction looks like, and then we're going to talk about why that happens. So Kaylee is actually a great example because she has scoliosis. All right, come on down, Kaylee. She's going to be right on the edge of the table here. So whenever you are coming all the way in, bring the knees all the way together. Good. So our lumbar spine should be able to stay nice and stable and flat on the ground. And when we stretch our hips, the lumbar spine should not move at all. Okay, so when we're looking at that back should be able to stay completely flat on the ground. But whenever we have tight hip flexors or immobile hips, we'll see that the actual whole pelvis moves, because right now the muscles should be moving, but the whole pelvis is going to move, and her back is coming off of the ground because her hip flexors are too tight and are not allowing her pelvis to stay stable. The muscle's not moving, the whole structural system is moving. So that's what happens when we have a mobile joint that is immobile. It actually affects the joint above it. So now that hip not working correctly is affecting her lumbar spine and her that stable joint above it. Okay, that's good. We get a good shot on that? We're good? Okay, good. All right. So what is a mobile and stable joint? So each joint actually has a purpose. It's either mobile, and it should be able to move freely in any movement pattern that it has. And a stable joint is meant to stay stable. It's not supposed to move, okay? So a quick example, as you can see, you can go up and down. It goes up and down. It alternates every joint of the body, mobile, stable, all the way through. So as a quick example, the knee is a stable joint. It only moves forward and backwards, just like that. When we start getting excess movement in the knee, it actually causes problem in the knee because it's not supposed to move like that. And then the hip, it's supposed to be a mobile joint. It's supposed to be able to move in all directions. When it doesn't move, it actually causes problems to the joints above and below it. So that's when if a hip's an issue, you'll see knee problems. If a hip's immobile hips, you can see lumbar, spine, and back issues. So that's what we're going to look at next is how do we fix an immobile joint? How do we go about identifying what an immobile joint is? So we're going to start is we have to identify which moving patterns aren't moving correctly, okay? So we're looking in the hip. There's 6 potential movement patterns. I'm going to show you exactly how each one of those works. We have hip extension, hip flexion, hip abduction, hip adduction, internal rotation, external rotation. I know those probably mean nothing to you, but that's okay. I'm going to show you. Tyler's going to come up, and we're going to go through each one of those movement patterns and show you what that means, okay? So laying on the back. Okay, so when we start up, so hip extension means the ability for your hip to move this direction, okay? When we say hip flexion, it's our ability for our hip and a whole femur to move that direction, okay? Abduction is the ability to move out. Adduction is the ability to move in. And then our internal and external rotation. So internal rotation is actually it's the femur moving inward, so your foot's actually going out. It's the ability to go out. And then external rotation is the ability to go inwards like this, okay? So when we're looking at this, so we're going to use external rotation as our example for today. So when we need good range of motion for your external rotators is about 90 degrees, and Tyler's got pretty close to good range of motion, just a little bit. So he's got a little tightness there. But a lot of times we see, and people don't even have range of motions past this right here. So when we get to the point and we're like, ooh, we're feeling full tension right here, we know that's a problem, okay? So then that takes us to the next step, okay? Thank you, Tyler. So once we find, okay, external rotation is a problem, what do we need to do? So we go back to our anatomy and we look, and there's actually 12 muscles that are involved in this external rotation, okay? So that's what we need to look at is, okay, which one or all of these are causing the problem? So that's where we get out we start identifying, is there trigger points that are a problem? So we start going in using our massager and identifying if there's any trigger points in any of those. And if not, then it's just we need to stretch. So we need to move into all potential movement patterns that external rotation is in and stretch all of these muscles effectively. Because we have to make sure we're getting those trigger points out, because if we don't get those trigger points out, we can't stretch, and then we were elongating that muscle, because we got to get that mobility in that movement pattern back. If we're not getting that mobility, it's going to affect something above and below it, okay? Okay, so why do these muscles get so tight? Thank you, thank you. There's a couple things. So it's back to very similar to our items from the trigger points. Sitting, sleeping positions, items you carry frequently in your exercise routine can all cause tight muscles. So if you're working the same muscle over and over and over again, it can cause it to be tight. But the biggest ones we see is sitting and sleeping can cause a lot of bad position. So if we are seated like this, we're going to stick with our hip. Our hip flexors are now in a shortened state, okay? So we're here, whenever we stand, our hip flexors are in an elongated state. So we're going to use this to kind of show you what that hip flexor is going to look like. So if we're completely, some people sleep in a ball. That's a contracted hip flexor. So those hip flexors are going to be sitting in that same position for 8 hours at a time. So they can get very, very tight. So when they get tight and when I go stand up, so we're actually going to take this off first. So we're going contracted state. If you're sleeping, you may be in a complete ball. We might be in a position like this, but when we go to stand up, we need to be in a position like this. So what happens when you get a tight hip flexus, so say these guys, this is going to be tight hip flexor, as we go to elongate this, we go to this, it gets really tight. It's putting a lot of tension. It's really hard. With this, I can't even get all the way extended because it's so tight, okay? So what happens, it's not allowing this to happen. So this muscle is going to be attached to your femur and at your pelvis. So whenever you come from a seated position, those muscles are contracted, and we go to stand up, we should be able to the whole pelvis should be able to come back. What happens is the whole pelvis stays forward. So then our lumbar spine, to get back up in a straight, is arched, and we're putting a ton of pressure on the lumbar spine because of we're affecting the joint above it. But in reality, if the hip flexors were functioning correctly, we'd be able to allow that pelvis to come back, and our lumbar spine can stay in that nice stable position. Okay, does that make sense there on how a tight muscle can affect that joint there? Good. Mr. Tyler can take that one for me. Excellent. All right, moving right along. Okay, is there any questions on how not having a mobile or stable joint can affect pain or anything like that? Is there any questions around the flexibility part? Kelly will have a mic if you have a question. No, that one's pretty straight up. Yeah, what's up?
Why am I so stiff when I get up at work and I walk like a 90-year-old woman?
Okay, so you sat down for how long at work?
Probably.
Yeah, so then those muscles are getting tight, so they're getting contracted, and then you go to stand up, you're trying to elongate those muscles, but they're not wanting to elongate because they've been tight the whole time.
I'm gonna start working on my hip.
Yeah, we're gonna probably have to start working on some hip flexion.
And that carries down the whole leg then.
It depends. It depends. Like you probably have lots of tightnesses from lots of different things. So one thing might not be stemming from another thing. But yeah. All right. Any other questions? Nope. All right. Moving all right along. Next is the third step. So if we get all the trigger points out and we have a body that all the joints are functioning correctly, the mobile muscles are working well, and we have full range of motion in those movement patterns, then we want to work on building strength balance. Okay, so that's what the last stage here is. What we're going to talk about is what is muscle balance. So we're going to start here. So muscle balance is just muscle balance means equal tensions pulling in each direction of the joint. So remember how I said there were 6 different movement patterns? Having equal tension pulling from each one of those joints. So what happens, Tyler, come on over, whenever we have too much tension pulling from one side, so these resistance bands are going to simulate our, say, joints, okay? So we'll say we're looking at back to our external to internal rotation example. Those are opposing movement patterns, okay? So if one is pulling a lot more strength than the other, it's going to affect the joint. So this would be 2 bands pulling at equal tension right now, okay? So that would be one movement pattern pulling at equal. If the joint there's an equal tension, the joint's directly in the middle. Whenever we start adding more tension to one side, so that's what we're going to do with this. We're going to add more tension to this side. Just like this. So you see the joint starts to be compromised. It's starting to come this direction. So the more strength we get over here, the muscles start coming this direction. So if this muscle is way stronger than this muscle, this is what's going to happen. So these muscles are going to always be coming this direction. So one, they're going to coming tight more and more often. So this is why the stretching and balance is key. So you have to stretch to be able to activate this muscle, because this is too far over. Those muscles are being overly stretched, and it's really hard for them to activate. And then these muscles are always strong and winning this battle, so they keep getting tighter. So this is why if you're only stretching and only getting those, working on those trigger points, it actually is not going to solve the problem. The third step is the long-term effect. The first 2 steps are there for short-term relief, and we can get out of pain quickly. But it's not going to be the long-term effect. We have to fix the overall problem, and that's the muscle imbalance. One side is twice as strong or however much strong than the other side, and that's what causes the issue. So we need to really build that, stretch it so we can activate that muscle, but then we also got to start building that strength where we have equal strength on both sides so there's no tension on that joint. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah, okay, excellent. Oh, actually, there's yours. All right. So what we need to do, so when our goal is to create muscle balance is we got to figure out which muscles are weaker, which one's stronger, and the key though is understanding how the body works. There's actually an order of operations, okay? So the body needs to work inside out. So the core needs to be the absolute strongest, and then as the body works out, then the muscles get a little weaker on the way out. So that the strongest core foundation has to be the middle, okay? Because if we add extra resistance up on the upper body or lower body or whichever it is, and your core is not strong enough to hold that stable base, you're going to come tumbling over, or you're not going to be able to effectively use this muscle. So we're going to show this video here. Kelly, you got it? You want me to get it? No, I got it. Yeah, okay, cool. And this is a crane. The crane is a great example of how this can work.
It's not showing up on my
Okay, I got you. So, time out. So, 1 second here. Okay, perfect. That was actually perfect right there. So, whenever you don't have a strong foundation and you do more workload than your body is able to handle. So as you can see, that crane was trying to lift up something heavier than it was able to hold. And whenever you do that, that's when you can fall over, like it's falling over. So it literally collapses over because it doesn't have the foundation underneath it to be able to do that workload. So whenever we're looking at trying to do an arm exercise and we don't have that upper body strength to be able to hold that and hold that pelvic stable and that center of gravity in place, then you're never going to be able to efficiently work that muscle, and you're going to lose balance. So balance is a big issue for people. Balance comes from core stability. You have the core to able to hold that center of gravity in place. So it's happening on the lower body. If you're way stronger in the legs than you are in the core, it's going to cause a lot of problems in the body. So that's the first thing we want to look at is how does the body work from inside out? So we want that center being the strongest. Okay. So what we have is a system where we can literally measure what the strength is at each joint, okay? So what we want in a perfect world is, as you can see, we want a pyramid here, okay? We want that center to be the absolute strongest. We want our core to be as strong as the part of our body. And then as we come down, the hips being the joint below the core, we want that to be the next. And then down to the knee joint, then down to the ankle. So like we want that progression to happen. So we want that good pyramid. Same thing going on through the upper body. The scapulas, next, shoulders, elbow, wrist. We want that whole progression happening. But what we see is mostly reports that come in looking like this. So we have lots of imbalances because our daily habits and our exercise routines and our injuries that we have not been actually promoting a perfect balance pyramid. So we see all the time people coming in, their quads, calves are way strong because that's what they're using instead of their core. Whenever they're walking, they're running, they're using a ton of quad and calf instead of being able to keep their core as a big component. And then we see scapulas is always a big one because we have that is part of our traps. We see those get overactive from all our over contractions of carrying stuff and stress. So those are overly contracted. They get overly strong. So this is a very similar report that we would normally see is because we don't do a lot of things that are activating our core unless we're intentionally doing it. So that's some things that we see in these imbalanced reports is our daily habits are really the big causes of these, or our exercise regimens, or can be a very incorrect exercise regimen can be a big component of it all. So say we do get a pyramid. That's not the end of the road. We want to make sure also that each joint has equal tension being pulled. So Tyler, I want to bring that over here. So I just want to get a quick visual here. So now you can see how Tyler added resistance bands to this side. So you can see now this is just going to be, we're going to say there's four movement patterns pulling here, but there could potentially be more pulling. But we need equal tension pulling from each direction, and that's what we want to be looking at. If we don't have equal tension pulling from each direction, and we have one joint pulling it way further this way or anything like that, it's really going to cause a lot of problems within the balance of the muscle too. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so that's what we look at is when it comes to our reports, and we're looking what is the front to back. So it's like opposing muscle groups. So if we're looking at hips, we like flexion and extension, like we talked about. How close are they in proximity? So we're always looking for about a 10% deviation from the numbers. Okay, so ideally, perfect world, we would have very, very similar numbers within close to 10%. Of the whole entire joint. So as you can see here in this report here, we have a 350 up here and we have like a 120 down there. That's a pretty big difference overall pulling the joint. So our first goal is always to look front, back, left to right because we want to get the opposing muscle groups and the opposite sides pulling at equal tension. Then we want to look at the joint as a whole. And then, okay, after we get that balance, let's look at it as a whole. Okay, is one muscle group still not pulling as strongly as the other side? So that's what we're really looking for of a whole, is try to get that joint pulling at a equal tension. So that's going to one. The joint mobility, if it's a mobile joint, can actually happen because we'll have equal tension pulling from each joint. So when we stretch, it'll stay too. That makes sense? Okay. All right. And then when we get balance, our reports look a lot like this. So we get a lot of more green happening. So when we get a lot more green in our reports, that means that we have balance pulling from every side, like we showed with Tyler's diagram there with the ball. So we want equal tension pulling from each side. So once we get a balanced joint and we get a pyramid in place. So we have equal tension pulling from each joint. We have a pyramid, so our body's working in the right order of operation. Each joint's functioning correctly. That's when we can start doing our push-ups and squats. So this is the number one mistake I see people making, is they skipped every one of those steps and they go straight to doing push-ups, they go straight to doing squats. Those are great exercises. They're actually the two best exercises you could possibly do, but if you don't have the body to be able to perform these movements, you're going to cause injury. If you don't have the core to hold the stable pelvis, here, you're gonna hurt your lumbar spine. If you don't have the shoulder mobility to hold a good, proper scapular stability, if you don't have the good shoulder mobility to hold the good scapular stability there, you're gonna hurt your shoulder. Same thing when it comes to squats. If you're not having perfect squat form, and if you don't have the hip mobility to get back in there, you're just gonna cause more damage than actually good in the movement. So that's the key, is making sure we're doing every step leading up to your body to doing, and then we can move into doing actual multi-joint exercises. And that is the goal, but we can't just jump straight to there. And that's where most people happen, is they're jumping straight to multi-joint exercises, because they are very effective exercises, but they will cause injury if you're not ready for them yet.
Why can't you do the core and then at the same time do the other parts? I know you have to have the core pyramid.
No, you can. So you can start working some balance in some of the other joints, and then working in the core. The core's got to be the strongest before we start doing multi-joints. Is that what you're asking? Or sorry, one more time, ask your question again.
Well, you got part of it.
Yeah.
The core part is very important, so can you not be working on that in addition to your other muscle groups that need the work, as opposed to just doing core?
We want to eliminate the muscles that are too strong. So like on the one report, the knee was really high. So we want to stay away from those. We actually, in the short term, want those to get weaker, just in the short term, so that we can catch our pyramid. So once we get them into a pyramid, then we can work all of them together. So that's where the multi-joint exercises are actually really good. You work all muscles at the same time. So once we can get that pyramid built, we can work everything together. Does that make sense? Yes, okay. And then another phase is you can work on the balance, like say you have a bit, like hips, you have a, like the hip imbalance, where you had one muscle group that was pulling way weaker than the other, working some of those other smaller muscle groups to build those up, so that once we get there, the core is the strongest, the hips is balanced, and everything's moving together when we get to that point, okay? Any other questions? I think that's where we're at. Questions now? Yes, questions. Do we have any questions of how the order, and the key is there is an order. You need to be doing each one of those in that order for that reason, okay? And even when it comes to the muscle balance, there is an order of which exercises we need to be doing in which order to make sure we're getting the appropriate balance. And it's a thing that, it isn't going to be fixed overnight. This is something that's been built over most people 20, 30, 40 years of imbalances. So it takes time to work these core muscles to get stronger. It takes time to balance these hip muscles and shoulder, scapula muscles. So it is a process, and that's what we got to understand. This doesn't immediately automatically be balanced. You can eliminate trigger points pretty quickly. You can see muscle elongation very fast, but that last stage of really fixing the problem, it takes time. It takes a lot of time. If we were working on it when we were 4 or 5 years old and we stayed on it, when we were that age, it's gonna fix way quicker. The younger we see the people, the faster the problem's fixed too, because the problems aren't as big yet either too. So just wrapping up now. So how do we apply this? So the key here is having the right action plan. So going into with the incorrect action plan is the fastest way to get the problem, to run into a problem in an injury. So just to recap, so the first thing we want to do is identify what joint is causing the problems, okay? So that's what we want to do. That's why we were looking at the hip. We're looking at, is there an immobility in that hip, okay? So once we find where the problem's happening in which joint, then we got to identify which movement pattern is causing the problem, okay? So then once we identify the movement patterns, so that was like external rotation, then we can look at what muscles are causing those problems. So there's a lot of layers to this. And then once we identify the problems, then we move to the three steps. Then we look at the trigger points. Is that the problem? Is the muscle fully elongated? Is there a muscle balance problem? Once we can do that, that's the steps to creating the whole body in a balance. And that's the goal of making sure everyone has their cores the strongest. And everyone's talked about core being the strongest for ages, but they never really told you why the core needs to be the strongest. And that's the key, is like understanding why core needs to be the strong foundation of it all and how to actually get there.